Okay, how you doing? Hey everybody, it's Mark Pattison. I'm back again with another great episode of Finding Your Summit, all about people overcoming adversity and finding their way. And I'm so excited to announce the release of the film that the NFL worked on for months and months. It's finally here on YouTube called Searching for the Summit. It's an epic doc of my trip up Mount Everest and back. That you can see that on my website at www.markpattisonnfl.com, or you can go to YouTube again, Searching for the Summit. In addition to that, I continue to raise money for my daughter, Amelia's Everest. You can go to my website again, markpattisonnfl.com, hit the philanthropy tab, and you can go, and all proceeds and funds go directly to Higher Ground, nonprofit here in Sun Valley, Los Angeles, and New York. And finally, to get inspired by rock stars like the person I have on today, I've got over 200 podcasts of really incredible people doing amazing things. Go in, give it the show a ratings and review on iTunes, Finding Your Summit. And that goes a long way towards the popularity of the show in the universe of Apple. So do that. Okay, let's jump into today's guest. This is a gentleman I've known for a long time. I've always called him Coach Hall, but when his parents originally had him many years back, he was known as Merrill Skip Hall. I didn't know Merrill. Sorry, buddy. So anyways, Coach Hall,
Yes,
how are you doing?
I'm doing well, Mark. It's always great to be with you.
Listen, I got to know you back in the day at the University of Washington, and it really blew my mind on the amount of talent that Coach Don James brought to the table in terms of the position coaches that coached up the players that you guys went out and recruited. And, you know, you can look at any organization. I want to get into that a little bit further with you, especially as your life has gone on from football in the sense of great leadership. And so from your standpoint, what did you learn from Coach James in terms of the pyramid of success, the hierarchy of leadership, the quality, the traits that people need to have to create great teams, whether it's on the football field or in business?
Yeah, well, first of all, I was with Don James for 18 years at 3 different universities. So obviously, I learned a lot. And he was a master of organization and detail, attention to detail. You know, discipline in a good way was another thing that I learned. And in recruiting, you know, we had a system in recruiting that I think was above and beyond most during that day and time. And he wanted us to focus on players that could come in and help us. One rule he had is don't bring anybody in that can't play. He said, I don't mind if one gets away here and there, but let's not bring anybody in that can't play. So the recruiting focus, and it was really the attention to detail in the recruiting process. We evaluated players so thoroughly, you know, not only on the field and on the film, but talking to their coaches, their teachers, their principals, and learning a lot about their character, about their academic pursuits. So we pretty much knew everything we could about a player before we brought him in to the university. And then it was all about organization, attention to detail, and discipline, being on time. You remember the old being on time routine. Yeah. If you were 10 minutes early, you were about on time.
Yeah.
If you were on time, you were actually late. But yeah, there are just so many wonderful things, and how to treat players, and how to go about your business with alumni and boosters. And you know, it was just a wonderful 18-year ride for me with Coach Don James.
You certainly seem to have it figured out. When I say you, I mean collectively the coaches, you know, really have it figured out. There's great consistency. While I was at the University of Washington for 5 years playing, we had tremendous success, 2 Rose Bowls my freshman, sophomore year that redshirted in there, Aloha Bowl, but we could have ended up, we should have ended up back in the Rose Bowl, you know, those other 2 years, right? Because of the last game, losses against Wazoo. And then, of course, we go on to what I thought was a devastating loss at USC down the Coliseum. We were ranked number 1 at the time, but we ended up in the Orange Bowl, and it really, to me, I'm interested in your take on this. It really ended up as a blessing in disguise. The University of Washington, actually in those days, the Pac-10, now the Pac-12, had never been in a Orange Bowl, and it just seemed to take us to another level of the prominence throughout the country, because, as you know, we played Oklahoma.
Yes, yeah, and beating Oklahoma, who was ranked number 2 at the time, I believe, and it gave us a good springboard. And obviously, after the game, and when the polls came out the next day, why BYU had won all their games. They didn't play the level of competition that we did, but because they'd won all their games, they gave them a slight nod. There were a few polls that still voted us number 1, but yeah, that was a blessing. That Orange Bowl experience was one of the best that I had while I was at Washington for 12 years. And yeah, it was a great win. And like I say, I think the pollsters got it wrong.
Did you have, I mean, this is just for my own curiosity. I think one of the great wins, and what really launched the program, I'm sure you're with the coaching staff, and that was the season in 1977. And you end up going to the Rose Bowl, kind of at the very end. You start off pretty rough start. I think there's 3 losses in a row. Warren Moon was the quarterback who would later go on to the Pro Hall of Fame. And you end up beating a favored Michigan team. When you look back on it now, and at the end of the day, there might be a tie, and there's no wrong answer here, but do you think you got more satisfaction or gratification just because those first couple of years at the University of Washington was such a struggle? Or did the Orange Bowl, something completely different? We're on the other side of the country. We were such underdogs. Everybody thought that Oklahoma, Barry Switzer, and they had the Boz, and they had all these big personalities, right? We're just going to roll right over us, and we beat them, right?
Yep. Absolutely. Well,
yeah. So the question is was there more gratification on one of those games than the other, or were they just all great?
Well, I think one led to the other, and let me explain. Here's the deal. So after the first 2 years at UW, we were 6-5, and then 5-6, and then we were 1-3 going into the third year. Well, needless to say, the natives were getting restless, and something needed to change. And a great leader knows what to do and when to do it. Coach James called a meeting when we flew back from Minnesota after the third loss, and had a team meeting when we got back. It was after midnight. Everybody went into the team room, players, coaches, managers, everybody. And he said, basically, to sum it up, we're not playing up to our ability. We've got much more ability in this room to do a lot better. And I want every one of you to write down on a piece of paper right now what you can do individually to help us improve as a team. And we all thought about it. We wrote down what we thought we could do individually. We signed it, and we turned it into him. Well, that next week at practice was like World War III. I mean, players were flying around. It was awesome. We went down and beat Oregon 54-0 the next Saturday. And that started us on the journey. And we ended up beating Michigan in the Rose Bowl, as you mentioned. But Mark, it went well beyond that. That was the trigger. That was the game changer and the program changing moment. For the next 10 years in a row, we went to bowl games. So that was the start of it. Obviously, the Rose Bowl was kind of the culmination of it. And the Orange Bowl, was a culmination. But yeah, it all started with a leader that knew what to do and when to do it.
What did you get out of coaching? Like, when you sum up and you look back on all these years, and we're going to get into your other professional life too, but I just want to kind of, really hone in on, so much of your identity was wrapped around, the not just the University of Washington, but also as the head man at Boise State. But like, you look back on those years, and what was magical about that for you?
Well, the players are the key to it all. Players win football games. Obviously, coaches can help set them up and get them in position and design plays and defenses and all that. But when the game starts, it's on the players, and working with the players and coaching them up is my book title. We'll probably talk about that later, but coaching them up so they can be their best version of themselves, that they can develop their brand, so to speak, and watching the progress of the players and seeing the excitement. We struggled for a little over 2 years, but then all of a sudden things really came to life, and you could see the results of our hard work and the efforts we were putting in. But yeah, just in the relationship with the players, and I still maintain relationships with players, like yourself, and even back some of my high school, when I coached high school back in the 60s, still maintain relationships with them. So that's what it's all about. It's about relationships, and it's watching people become the best version of themselves.
Yeah, I love that. I look back at my own experience playing at the University of Washington. I came as this kind of skinny, 6'2", 181-pound kid who couldn't bench his weight, never been in the weight room. And I was seriously lost for a number of years in that program. But, because of the roadmap that was set forth by Coach James and then trickled down by the position coaches, and in those days was Coach Pinkel, who would later go on to great success at Missouri.
Right.
What I learned out of all of that is that if you do what you're asked to do, and you put in the hard work, and you suffer through and do it with daily discipline and commitment, that there's no certainty on the other end that A is going to equal B, because as you know, there's only so many players that can be on the field at one time, and the cream rises to the top. But it did put me in that position to be ready. And then, where I really got my first break was when we were playing Michigan at home, when we came back by 2 touchdowns in 1983 in Husky Stadium, when we had that incredible comeback and win in the last seconds,
Yes.
And so, and then from there, things took off for me. But, again, it's just like, sometimes people see the shiny object of my career, of really those last 2 years, and they don't realize the 3 years of hell that I had to go through to get 2 years of glory, right?
Yeah. You gotta, you get out of it what you put into it. And oftentimes it takes, a couple of years or so to get to where you want to be, where you need to be. But yeah, those that are willing to pay the price, those are the ones that are going to become winners. They're going to experience a lot of great success.
Yeah, I was recently in Seattle, and I was asked to speak at a function, and I spent some time with Jimmy Rogers, JR.
Yeah,
and not only what a great guy, but his tenacity was really infectious. And also that table is Don Dow, all these guys, Scott Fawcett, Tom Flick, Tom Turner, Tim Cowan, those guys. And like these are guys for life that I can count on, and they were there to root me on this little talk about Mount Everest. But to when you're in a room and you're looking around and you're going, we got a bunch of badasses in this room that can play and are talented. And those, again, I didn't know any of these guys when I first got there. Each one of us came from someplace different, and you join this new community, and then the way that the coaches, through their leadership and their mentorship, can really bring this group together to form, something really greater than all of us combined, which is really special.
Yeah, that's the word, special. That's exactly right. And those guys you mentioned, all great guys. And you mentioned Jimmy Rogers, and I recruited Jimmy out of Aloha High School in Oregon, and we had to fight hard to beat Notre Dame for him. But fortunately, he came with us, did a great job, a great career. I call him Jimmy the Jackhammer, because I saw him jackhammer more people. And that game at Michigan, where we beat Michigan in front of 103,000 people, and Jimmy was pounding those guys like crazy. And but what a great bunch. And that's what's special about it too, as a coach, is to see that you see individuals rise, and you also see groups of people come together, and they're going to maintain friendships for the rest of their lives. And in Coach James' program, we like to refer to what we were doing. And I know Coach Peterson, who's a friend of mine, used to coach at Washington. He uses the same thing, built for life. We wanted to help build players for life. And it was great when they're playing and winning games and going to bowl games, but then you got to do something else for about 50 years. And to see the success that the players have after football, that's what's special also.
So that sounds like a great transition for us right now. So you spent 18 years, with Coach James. We didn't know it at the time, but turns out to be a Hall of Fame coach, right? Just
Absolutely.
like over the top success.
Yep.
And revered, as you know, at the University of Washington. But now you get this, and this happens very often when you have a team and a coach who's very successful, then other teams start reaching in and plucking out these various coaches. And a lot of these coaches went off to do their own thing, just like you. What was that like for you, transitioning from the kind of the security blanket, for lack of a better word, of being with Coach James and the Husky program and these other schools that you were with, to now get an opportunity to be the head guy at Boise State?
Yeah. Well, after, spending 18 years with him and being at Washington for 12 years, and I'd interviewed once at Oregon State and almost got that job, but you kind of get the itch, to build your own program. You after being with Coach James that long, I knew what it took and how to do it. And so I was pretty picky. I didn't want to just jump off and become a head coach anywhere, but the pro scouts would come through Washington and they'd tell me, look, if that job at Boise State ever opens up, it's a special place. You really need to check into that. And when it did open up and we did check into it and we were offered the job and made the move and spent 6 years there as the head coach. But yeah, I just think, when it's time to maybe look at an opportunity to become a head coach, you want to feel like you're well prepared first, however. And the other thing was the athletic director at the time, Mike Lude, had encouraged me to, he said, someday you're probably going to have a chance to come back to Washington, maybe as the head coach. And it'd be good for you to get out and get some experience under your belt. And so that was another thing that kind of was in my mind about maybe it would be a good idea to do that.
Well, it's interesting you say this. I wasn't going to bring this up, but since you sort of brought it up, not directly, but this is our current coach at the University of Washington. Looks like a wonderful person, but there was a big difference, as you know, between being an assistant coach and being a head coach. And I would have really liked to have seen whoever we had, in place as the head coach of the University of Washington football team, since it's such a prominent university, to have some kind of head coaching experience so they understand about game management and these other things. And I think in part, that's one of the reasons why UW is struggling right now. One of the guys that it looks like you may have had on your initial coaching staff is Jim Zorn. He was a famous quarterback for the Seattle Seahawks, known for him hooking up with Steve Largent, running all over the field. But that must have been a wonderful experience to have a guy that's so, someone comes across at least as so bright and cheery and positive spirit.
Absolutely. That was a big deal when I hired Jim and he came to Boise, and of course everybody took notice and was excited about it. And Jim had an infectious personality with everybody, really, but with the players especially. Why he just loved those guys to death and coached them well and coached them hard, and he did a great job for us. We went to the national semifinals. It was a 1AA program at the time, and they had playoffs, and we went all the way to the national semifinals and got beat in a triple overtime. Otherwise, we'd have been on to the national championship, and Jim was the quarterback coach. But, it was fun having Jim there. And then Steve Largent, who was his friend, he would come to our spring practices and work with the wide receivers. And those two guys would share experiences after practice with the players. And yeah, it was really neat to have quality guys like that around our players.
One thing, as you know, I'm close friends with Jim Mora, and so I've seen this as a player and I've seen this as a friend, close up. And it doesn't matter how successful you are or you're not successful. Typically, coaches, they're moving from here to there. Urban Meyer is a great example. Great tenure at I think Utah State, and then Florida, and then Ohio State now in the pros with the Jags. But But for you, you coached at Boise State for 6 years, and for whatever the reason, now it's time to move on. And so you moved into a long career in business. And
Well, actually, Mark, before the business, I
yeah,
went to Missouri for 4 years.
that's right. I'm sorry.
Yeah. I was an associate head coach, defensive coordinator at Missouri, and Bob Stull and I were together
Yeah.
for a year at Missouri. And then after 4 years there, we felt like it was time to move on. And I was really interested in taking the skill set that I had developed of coaching, recruiting, and team building, and see how that would work in the business arena.
Mm-hmm. And how, what were the business people that you interacted with? Did you find that more of a challenge or less of a challenge in terms of the people that you were essentially teaching these new skill sets of leadership and these other qualities that make leaders great leaders?
Yeah, and recruiting. No, they were hungry. They were really hungry, and they appreciated somebody that had spent all those years in recruiting and building teams and coaching them up. And so, yeah, I spent a lot of time helping them in recruiting and coaching up their managers about recruiting and how to go about it and how to get into athletic departments and seek young men that were coming out of college that were going to be looking for careers. And so, yeah, it was a great fit. I spent, I still am connected with Aflac in certain ways, but spent a good 15 years working as a regional manager and recruiting coordinator and helping build teams. And yeah, a lot of that is in my book. That story is in my book.
Yeah, so let's talk about your book. So Coach 'em Up, right? And I can tell you this, I was, because of my background, my past, and as you know, I recently came off Mount Everest, and so
Yep.
I've had some people come to me, and I've got a book that is going to be in the works. I need a lot of help with that, and it's a lot to take on, and my schedule is pretty packed. But where did this come up? Coach 'em Up, and give us a little bit more insights on what the book was about. I can only tell by the title, and how long that took you to actually put this thing together.
Okay. First of all, let me just say that, if you're considering writing a book, you want to have a team of people that can really help you. And that's what I had, a publisher, an editor, and a co-writer, and it just makes things all a lot more easy to do. So, but the way this book came about, there was a lady that here in the Boise area that has Aloha Publishing. She's a publisher, done many great books. She had been after me for 20 years to put something together, and I just didn't have the time. I didn't feel like I could take the time to do it. But when the pandemic hit, well, that was my trigger. So I didn't have much else to do. So I thought, well, if we're going to do this thing, we might as well get going. So I did. And let me tell you two quick stories about how this book came about. So I think it was our second year at Washington, and nobody was really happy with how the program was doing and going, and coaches were frustrated. And one morning at our staff meeting, every morning each position coach would go over his players, how they're doing in school and on the field and all that. So it got to me, and I said, man, my players, they're hurt, they're sick, they get family problems, they got girlfriend problems, they got academic problems. And I went on my rant for a while, and all of a sudden, Coach James just looked at me and he said 3 words: coach them up. Coach them up. Sometimes leadership is pretty simple. And he said, coach them up. Well, that changed my whole philosophy of coaching, about, caring more about the players and working with the players and helping them work through their problems and stuff, and rather than just complaining about them. So that was the first story. The second story is, when I left Boise State and went to Missouri, I was there for about 2 weeks, and I was in my office, and a young man came to the door, and he was in his 30s and dressed casually, and he said, Coach Hall, can I have a word with you? I said, sure, come on in. So he came in, sat down, he started telling me the story. He said, 10 years ago, you and I, you meaning me, we were together at the University of Washington. I was a walk-on player. You were one of the coaches. One day of practice, he said he was stumbling and fumbling and bumbling. And the young coach that was working with him was all over him, screaming at him, yelling at him, cursing him. And he said, I came over and got between the two of them. And the player thought I was going to turn to him and correct him. He said, but I turned to the young coach and said 5 words that had such a tremendous impact on this young player's life. Well, I was real interested now because I couldn't remember the 5 words. But the 5 words he said were coach them up, not down. Coach them up, not down. That's what we need to be teaching people, whether it's in coaching, whether it's in business, it's even in the families. We need to coach people up and get the best out of them and work with them if they're not where they should be or want to be. But that's how the coach them up philosophy came about. It was first spoken to me as a young coach, and then I've given it to a lot of people over the years. And this former player, had become a pastor in a small Missouri town, and he'd driven over an hour to come down and tell me this story and to thank me for the impact it had on his life. And he said the best sermon he's ever given, the one most requested, is titled Coach 'em Up, Not Down.
I love that. I love that. Where can people find your book?
Well, there's 2 ways. One, just by going on Amazon and looking it up, Coach 'em Up by Skip Hall. The other is kind of a simple way to do it. You just go to coachemupbook.com, coachemupbook.com. That'll lead you right into a website that you just push a button and you can you can order it. You can read about it. There's some stories and pictures and stuff in that website also. But yeah, either through Amazon. It's going to be in bookstores too. It's only been out for like 3 weeks, but it's already doing really well. So yeah,
I need to get an autographed copy. I'd love to read that book. And the reason why that is, those aren't just words, those are actions for me, is just because I was telling somebody who was asking me, like, how do you keep it going? And I say, I think we all need inspiration, and you never know who's going to have an impact on you. Right.
Yep.
And so every day, Jim Moore and I run up the mountain. After we get done with this podcast, I'm going to run up the mountain with Jimmy. And, in my ear, I've got one plug in and one plug out, and I have one plug out so I can hear Jim when he says something. I have one plug in where I'm listening to inspirational people like you talk about, life lessons that they have learned over time. And then the question is, how can I apply those things towards my life? Right. And,
Yes.
And it's been really interesting on my journey really quickly. As you know, I just got up Mount Everest, but it was really a 10-year journey on kind of, going through a rough patch and then coming out of that and moving kind of into the light, and now being able to turn around and help people. And it's, especially with this movie that just came out, it's amazing that I get the same sense with you. I never got into mountain climbing, or now they've made this movie. It was never about a movie or a book or a podcast or any of that kind of stuff. It was just all about following my passion and trying to get myself healed, in my case. And because I've been on the field for a long time, 5 years with you and watching you in action, such a great role model from the players that have high respect for you. And the type of man you were of not having such a big ego, that Coach James could say and suggest something to you like coach him up, and you could internalize that. And then when that situation came up, you were able to rise to that occasion, and then you end up changing this other player's life, who now becomes a pastor somewhere in small town USA, Missouri. I mean, like, you don't have to change a million people, but if you change just one person's life because of something positive you've done, what a miracle.
Yeah. Oh yeah. No kidding. And another thing that I'd share about the book, Nick Saban wrote the foreword. Nick and I were together at Kent State. That was back in the early years, right after they'd shot 4 students on campus at Kent State, while Coach James and the James gang, the original James gang, went into Kent State. And we had a rough time recruiting the first year, but the second year we won the championship. We were last in the conference the first year. won the championship in the second year, went to the bowl game. But one of the players was Nick Saban. Nick was a great player for us, a very competitive guy, no nonsense guy, wanted to get her done. He was let's focus on winning, and winning was big with him. And then he and I coached together for 2 years at Kent State after he was done playing. But he wrote the foreword, and he shares, some really good information in there. And Chris Peterson, who was the coach at Washington, and before that here at Boise State, he wrote an acknowledgement for the book as well. So to have a couple of really, I think, well-respected coaches that coach for the right reasons and are very good at what they do, and how then the players that go through the program are going to turn out later in life. So that was really important to me too, to have those two guys behind this project. But the book is really about how the power of influence and encouragement changes lives. How the power of influence and encouragement changes lives. And it does. And that's what we need to build our house upon, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that. They always talk about potential, and basically what potential is somebody who's got a capacity of a high ceiling, but essentially hasn't reached that, hey, that player has a lot of potential. Well, the goal, and I believe it can really only happen through those words that you just used, through encouragement, the power of positive thinking.
Yeah. And influence.
And influence. Period. Right. It's
Period.
just like that. That's what gets people to maximize their ceiling and take people to places they never thought was possible.
Yeah. And that's a coach's job. A coach's role is to take them places that they couldn't go by themselves, to help them get to a place where they want to be. Yeah.
Yeah. And I never understood. And for the most part, I never had these types of coaches for the most part. But, negative coaching, obviously there's positive coaching and negative coaching, but just like this one coach that you intervened, which was coaching him down, not up.
Right.
And so chewing somebody out, like, how could you ever gain confidence when somebody says you stink, right? You can't move the ball, when those things happen.
It causes discouragement, and discouragement, when that starts to set in and you start questioning yourself, and it's just the wrong way to go. Instead of coaching them up and giving them encouragement, not discouraging them, but giving them encouragement in a way that you still correct the issues that you have to correct, but you do it in a positive, winsome way, and not beat them down and get them to lead them to discouragement.
Well, I love this. And I look at, it takes a village to raise a family, and it takes a village to raise an individual. And I think I really mean this when I say this, all those coaches, Coach Lambo, who you're tight with,
right.
He's the one that recruited me out of Roosevelt High School there. And Coach James, the lessons learned has been eternal. Coach Pinkel was my position coach. I mean, I could just go down the list, all those guys. Coach Pease, I was with him in New Orleans. He was coaching under Coach Mora, who you coached with, way back when, right? All these guys. And, how blessed was I to be able to be in that era at that time, being in the right place at the right time, and being taught like what work ethic is. And I don't know, it just gives me such great satisfaction. And I wish I was a part of that magic dust, and I wish everybody could experience it. You can't, but I thank you for being a part of that village and being the man who you are. And what a great legacy to, have done the things that you've done, affected so many people, and now to have come up and written this book. And I can't wait to read it.
Yeah, well, I'm going to get your address and make sure that you get one. And also, I've got a radio show that's kept me busy for the last 4 years called Gameplan for Life. In fact, you've been on it, and you're on the podcast of Gameplan for Life through, it's a station in Boise, 94.1. But I wanted to tell you a little story about your buddy, Jimmy Moore.
Yeah.
I coached Jim. He kind of bounced around from the secondary, and then
Yeah.
I had him for a while at outside linebacker. And one game we were going to play USC, and our starter was hurt. And so I went to Jimmy and I said, Jimmy, I got good news and bad news for you. So the good news is we're playing USC this week. The bad news is you're starting. I think he weighed 195 pounds, and he had to play against the big tight ends. But you know what? He did a great job. He really held his own, and he fought his tail off. And we ended up beating USC that year. But yeah, that's a fun story about Jimmy. He was a real competitor too. We
Well,
got Jackhammer Jimmy and competitor Jimmy.
well, you also got Tom Flick from French Lick, or whatever you call him.
Oh no, Tommy Flick from Pumpkin Creek.
Pumpkin Creek, yeah. We tell that story. We were just out to dinner last weekend in Sun Valley together. So he's wonderful.
Yeah, he's a great one too. Yeah.
Well, listen, I appreciate you coming on. Thank you for your generosity of inviting me on your shows a couple of times. But, I mean this from the bottom of my heart. You're a good guy, and you deserve all the successes that you've had. You've impacted so many people, and I'm right at the top of the list. So thank you for that. And we will put a lot of these things that you talked about in the show notes and where people can buy that book.
Oh, that's great, Mark. Well, listen, in closing too, I just want to congratulate you again on your story and your history and your career, and especially how many people actually get to climb not only Mount Everest, but is it 7 peaks?
Yeah. There's about 350 people have climbed the 7 summit.
That is just an unbelievable accomplishment, and congratulations to you, my friend.
Thank you.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
Thank you. All right. Well, listen, I totally appreciate you coming on, and it's been wonderful, awesome getting caught up and hearing these little micro stories. They've really been inspiring, and nothing but the best to you going forward.
Thank you, Mark. It's been my pleasure.
All right. There he is, the one, the only Coach Skip All. Thank you.